Okay, let's talk about race and racism. I'm obviously uh, not black or brown. I'm uh, I'm obviously Asian, and Asian. That's kind of a murky way to describe because we used to use from people like myself Oriental, and often that was a derogatory thing, but you know, Asian Orientals basically didn't make a huge fuss about it, and or like me, I was ignorant of what the connotations uh, behind the word Oriental. So, and I'm digressing here on that, but basically, I do know one thing, and this is from my own personal life, and it's something a pitfall that my brother and myself fell into. Uh, I grew up in Canton, Massachusetts. We were adopted by a lovely couple, Mike and Judy Mahan. Uh, you know, Short history. We were born in Seoul, South Korea. We until until I was around 5 or 5.5 years old, and my brother was he was a year and a half younger than I am. Uh, we lived uh, we lived in a very dirt poor um, Korean family. Uh, there was my mother, my birth mother, my grandmother, and I think we had some cousins, or they could have been just simply older girls from neighbor. The uh, the home that we lived in was basically four tall concrete walls with a old style gigantic wooden doors that had a bar that you could put a bar across, a thick wooden bar across, kind of like the very much reminiscent of what you would see in Western movies where they show you old castles or fortifications where they put where they have these gigantic wooden doors, and you would put a thick wooden bar across to keep the door closed. So, anyways, that's how we grew up. The interior was shared by two families, my family and another family, and we were dirt poor. The other family that lived in there was perhaps a little bit more well off economically speaking, because they had access to television, and so we and they were great people. Specifically for me, and I'll get to that later. But my we used to watch the $6 Million Man and other U.S. programs on on the TV that they had. Uh, we personally didn't have TV. As a matter of fact, we cooked with in a stone or a mortar stove with we with wood and so on and so forth. And uh, I don't remember if we had electricity. I think we did, but I think it was very spotty. Uh, anyways, my grandmother, who was blind and almost deaf, I used to walk her around, and she would sell over the counter drugs like aspirin and ibuprofen, that sort of stuff, and that's how she contributed to the household. And I would walk her around and help her sell that. I would also do all sorts of odd jobs, and this is uh, while I was uh, while I was before I was even five. Uh, I know I had a lot of issues with the what basically roving gangs of uh, of richer uh, Korean kids who were closer because this is in the outskirts of the actual the capital, um, and like suburbs. Like kind of like what you see. Yeah, Boston has a bunch of suburbs, which is included in Boston. Included as part of Boston. Um, there was a lot of tension between the rich kids and the poor kids like me, and so I actually remember being the leader of the gang poor kids, and we would have rock fights in the streets. Uh, we would have little fights with them. They would come in and and basically talk shit and cause trouble, and which is always the case. It's usually not the poor who cause these troubles. It's the richer kids, because the richer neighborhoods have a tendency to buy into the all that crap. All the poor are poor because of choice. The poor are poor because they're mean spirited, and they don't teach manners. And so there's a lot of that happened. So, but as a extremely poor family, I was because I was the oldest, and because also I was the oldest son, it was expected of me to help provide. Now, understand, uh, I'm probably like 3 or 4 uh, years old, and all the way up until about 5.5 years. I'm doing a lot of stuff to help out the family. My mother, who was a single parent, and as I said, I believe I had some cousins, female cousins, or possibly just the neighbors. Although I'm leaning more towards female cousins or friends of the family, or perhaps even somebody from the wealthier who were compassionate, and they were working. Um, Whatever the case may be, uh, I do remember two distinct. It's fuzzy now in my memory, but two distinct older females. I'm not sure how old they were. They could have been. They were definitely in their mid. They had to be either in their mid-teens or older, possibly even in their 20s. But they used to come around and help, and even watch us. But going back to my mother, so this is going back to what I said I was gonna talk about it later. So my mother was a angry, violent woman, uh, and I used to have a lot of animosity towards her when I was younger. She used to beat the ever loving tar out of me a lot when I was young, and she beat my brother as well. And it wasn't just physical. She would do verbal, emotional, mental, and all that. And she had an anger issue. But now that I'm older, I've come to understand why she was that. Because there was a lot of strain and stress on her. Because she could never seem to pull herself up by the bootstraps, which is the most ridiculous and stupid thing. Uh, you know, she worked. She worked multiple jobs to try to support her kids but and understandably she was frustrated, angry, and she was depressed, and as the oldest male, I was expected to take exceptional responsibility and be more responsible, more cognizant of uh, of the family and what responsibility I had towards the family. So one of the things that I used to do is I would take either younger kid, even younger, more even younger kids than me, and particularly this one because it's something that's stuck in my mind because of the traumatic situation. I don't know if it was a cousin. I used to think it was a cousin, but I would say cousin. But then I could be wrong. It could be. It could have been family. I mean, family friend, or it could have been from the two girls that used to come over and help us a lot. It could have been. It could have been. It could have been a relative. It could have been. It doesn't matter. Thing is that I was very confident. I was very confident when I was young, and I was very responsible, and so on and so forth. But one particular day, I was put in charge of watching this little boy, and there was in my mind, it stuck. The word menagerie stuck, but basically, what a menagerie is like a zoo. Uh, that's basically what it is. So I was uh, I was put in charge of this little boy, and I was supposed to watch out for him and keep him occupied. And so I decided to take him to the zoo or the menagerie. Well, uh, I walked him down, and we came to a major thoroughfare, and there was a lot of cars and so on and so forth. And I had crossed this a lot, but back then there weren't a lot of traffic laws, and it wasn't really all that well enforced, and or awareness. And so that particular day, I was panicked. I panicked. I don't know why. I panicked. As I said, I've crossed this plenty of times, but I panicked that day, and I said to the little boy, I said, "You go first, and I'll follow." And I was a coward. I panicked. I got frightened, and I panicked, and uh, and I convinced this little boy to go cross a major busy thoroughfare. The uh, the 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 cars weren't stopping. They weren't following the. I convinced him to go, and he went. He got run over. 6 sets of tires ran over this little boy. I saw him bounce up and down. the I think the second or third car that ran him over stopped and uh, and took him into the car, I I was shocked and panicked and ashamed and frightened, and I didn't know what happened to him. And I went back home, and by the time I got back home, my mother had found out about what had happened, and she was understandably angry, furious. She went into a murderous rage, and she tried to drown me. We had those gigantic clay cisterns where rainwater was collected, and she put me in there and tried to drown me. My neighbors stopped her as she was trying to hold me down and drown me for the dishonor that I had committed, for the cowardice I had committed, for the faith that she had placed in me. And because of my neighbors, I didn't die that day. But she committed suicide shortly after. I tried to stop her, but she just basically took all those over the counter pills, the aspirins and the ibuprofen and all that, and she downed bottle after bottle after bottle of it until it killed her. I remember her foaming at the mouth from all those drugs going into her system and killing her. And it was shortly after that, I don't know how much longer, that a man came, a man in a suit came and took my brother and me. He had to use candy and other things to entice us to go on this bus, and we were taken to an orphanage. And that first orphanage was run by a bunch of Catholic nuns. You could I remember them in their habits, and that's another story. It was not a favorite thing to think for me to remember, because they were using all the kids, all these children, as slave labor. They didn't really explain anything, but I pieced it together. But basically, they had these plastic, raw plastic holly ornaments, and you would put into this windowless room, and the smell coming off the plastic would make you sick. It would make you vomit. And if you refused to work, they would drag you out. They would drag you out of that room, and they would have this gigantic paddle of some sort of wood, probably be oak or something like that, with holes in them, half-inch holes in them, and beat the ever-living tar out of you. I used to take the beatings for my brother and for others. And anyways, that was just the first orphanage. The second orphanage was there wasn't a lot of physical beating but and the slavery, but they committed a lot of things. Basically, they left really young children to to take care of everything. It was run by a bunch of white kids, probably college, perhaps even high school kids, probably getting credits or something like that. It was funded by donations, and and one of them I know for a fact is Catholic. Was involved in a Catholic charity. Came from Catholic charities. Uh, so it was not. It was not the. It wasn't the most. Wasn't the best place for young kids. Um, Later on, when I was about 7.5, and that was after the second orphanage. While in the second orphanage, I was 7.5, and my brother was 5.5. That we were adopted, and then by Mike and Judy Mahan. But uh, coming down into the progressing along here, we had we noticed. Me and my brother noticed by the way the cartoons, by the way the TV shows, by the way the movies portrayed Asians and other minorities and blacks, and black people. We started to see a pattern, and living as a living under a white in a white family in a white suburb. Uh, I think we got the idea that perhaps we had some white in us, and and this went on for a long time. We could see the bias and the way I grew up kind of I grew up I was the family was family raised us as Catholics, Christians, and so I grew up being ashamed of being who I was and what I was, and even to the point where of manufacturing that we had possibly some white genetics behind us. And there's an interesting story where we had said this in front of a Korean gentleman called Grandmaster Lee. He's a grandmaster of Taekwondo, a ninth degree Dan, and my brother at the time was doing Taekwondo, and the grandmaster had said, "No, you are not. You are not. You don't have any white in you. You are Korean." And so this is going on until the we were in our I was in my I think my mid-20s. So, and my brother was in his 20s as well. So it could have been even later than mid-20s, but you can see where we didn't. We always knew we were Korean, but there was that kind of unconscious thinking, because white philosophy, the white agenda was so prevalent in the media and in the news. And this is not to say that that we are in any way, shape, or form part can be attributed to the oppression and suppression that the black community, specifically the black community, and I got to say the indigenous community faces, because what the news doesn't talk about is how the constant attacks, the breaking of treaties, and the murders, and the disappearances, and the beatings, as well as the invasion of the sovereignty the ability for the indigenous people living in sovereign parts of the United States that belong to them can't even do their own courts, can't even do their own laws, because the federal government constantly interferes, because the FBI constantly outstrips them, strips them of their sovereignty and independence, and how the white law enforcement within the states around it and the white state governments do all this violence against them. So this is racism. And this is also an indictment against the criminals who hold position. The criminals in the financial and in the industrial and production and all that, and how these criminals who owned vast amounts of wealth and thereby owned influence, lands, power, resources, and how they are doing a narration that is working against even the white people, engineering attention and division of common interests, of common natural laws, and how that we collectively are responsible for allowing these crimes done against us collectively. Because money and the system that money is involved with, called capitalism, and whether it's capitalism or any other system, fundamentalism, feudalism, all that, it's all about controlling money and thereby controlling resources and thereby controlling people. And it's all so that they can make more money to control more lands, control more resources, control more influence. And by us buying into the system, and by us propping up the system, they control life and death. They control our intellectual, our emotional, our spiritual, our physical lives. And we live in an imprisonment of our own making. They allow us to be the invisible chains of slavery. That is what we have, because we are willing to participate in a system that we help to prop up, that we help to promote. You know, a prime example is pharmaceutical drugs. It is we who do the research. It is we who put the physical and intellectual labor into this. It is we who develop the knowledge that are used in our colleges, in our higher education, in the institutions that do the research. It is we who do this, and it is they who take the rights by giving something that has no intrinsic value except for our willingness to allow it to happen. And thereby we shackle ourselves, we narrow our vision, we narrow purpose. No, there is no purpose in this. We narrow our focus, we narrow our aspirations, our opportunities, our lives. We are nothing more than the not metaphysical, but the metaphorical horses drawing the buggy or drawing the carts with those blinders on. And that and that is how we are the slaves. That is how we are commodities. That is how we are the serfs and the peasants, because we buy into the system, because we prop up the system, because we believed in the lies told by these criminals, because we have to strive within our insular lives and our insular communities to get the small pittance that we have, rather than we could be focusing on our dreams and our aspirations, real dreams, real aspirations, where we could actually have purpose, where we could actually evolve, where we could actually grow as a community and aspire to become the Star Trek Federation, where we could have more than the narrow focus and vision of wanting to become famous, of wanting to become rich, of wanting to become doctors or lawyers or whatnot, firemen, soldiers. We could have thousands of more choices. But we have a system that creates a narrow vision, without focus, without direction, that we have self-imposed upon ourselves, that we put us down when we keep ourselves down. There is no truer saying that money is the root of all evil. Because if we're busy fighting with ourselves and with our fellow humans to strive to get the small pittance, then we are self-sabotaging, self-imposing those restrictions, limiting our aspirations, and suppressing our dreams. And when I say fighting with ourselves, meaning myself or you, because we're fighting internally, when there is a true direction, a true purpose, when there is a true solution, because we're fighting the peace that we could have internally when the solutions are there. It's always been there. It's been facing us right in front of our faces. It's like when we lose our car keys or lose our wallet. It's always right in half the time we can't, when we can't find it. Half the time it's right in front of us. More than half the times. And that's because we fight. We fight ourselves internally. We blame ourselves for things which is created by them. The ones who hit every single thing that the Ten Commandments states. And I'm not religious. But those 10 commandments, have an element of truism, because they are all based upon the golden rule. Understand, the whole system is generated to create violence and strife and fighting and bickering and arguing. That we internalize. That we do to each other. And when we're busy doing that, they are safe to continue to push for a dead end, no life, depressive, suppressive, oppressive system that kills us spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and physically. That is what we must throw the shackles off. That is what we must do away with. I've said it before. They use violence to suppress. They use violence to get their way. They use violence to have us fight ourselves. When, in fact, by laws of nature, by reality, there is a time when violence is necessary, when violence is a teacher, because violence engenders the fear that makes us think. Fear is not something to be feared. That is another truism. It is fear that keeps us from knowing when violence is necessary and when violence is unnecessary. There's always avenues. Just like the system has multiple vectors and factors of violence, we can use violence in the multiple vectors. We can use the violence of saying, no, we will not stand for it. No, we will not buy into it. No, we do not accept it. No, we do not tolerate it. And no, we are not going to fund you. We are not going to back you. We are not going to ascribe to it. We are not going to play your games. Your immoral, your vindictive, your prejudice, your bigotry, your hypocrisy. We are not going to do it. And we can do that by divesting them of the very thing that they need before we turn to physical violence. Because violence and fear is not always physical. They fear losing their power, their money. So when we use the violence and the fear of taking away that is a good avenue to go. But it is violence and it is fear. And this is something I've been talking about. And people have stuck to a very narrowed vision of what fear and violence is. Yes, is there a time when violence is necessary? The physical violence? Yes, it's when the unrepentant, when they continue to do their violence and escalate the violence to try and get you to become fearful so that you will stop doing your violence and fear against them by way of divesting them. Then it is time to use physical violence. Then it is time to take them out of the picture because they are unrepentant, because they are the epitome of evil. Yes, there is evil. And that is when they use the violence of their money to pay, whether it's police or others, to come and do physical violence and oppression and suppression. That is when violence becomes necessary. So understand, violence does not have one narrow vision, one narrow description, because violence encompasses multiple factors, because violence is a part of living. Violence is a part of nature. Otherwise, we are nothing more than the sheep being led around. We are nothing more than farmyard and slaughterhouse animals to be processed and used, and oftentimes against ourselves. So, I hope this enlightens you, and I hope you'll consider my words, because I see a vision for us collectively where we can have the peace that we all universally seek. We can have the enlightenment we all wish. We gotta stop wishing for it, and we have to start doing for ourselves. And that starts with understanding and bringing a community together and utilizing our intellectual and physical, emotional, and spiritual labors to bring about the vision of peace that we all know is there, but are afraid to tackle it. And that is violence. That is another aspect of the violence that they, the criminal few, perpetuate while we buy into it and we propagate and promote, because we buy into it, because we will not think beyond it, or we lack the imagination, the ignorance to see the solution. Violence is a suppression of knowledge. Violence is a suppression of initiative. Violence is a suppression of imagination and innovation. Real innovation. I'm not talking about the superficial innovations of smartphones, because those are superficial. And anybody who tells you that smartphones would never come up, or cars, or satellites, or rocket science, they're lying. They are lying. That is the part of the violence of the system. When they tell you that it is through military, and military actions and wars and other violence they are lying. Because we will always strive to find a way to innovate our lives. But innovating lives for the community is actually something that can surpass everything that we use now, and surpass it without having it come to bite us in the ass. And that is a truism. Thank you for your time.